My life was like a perfect kaleidoscope. Vibrant hues, endless possible combinations, each carefully chosen and arranged. I always thought that our marriage with Doris would be just as perfect. We were a couple that inspired, successful, ambitious, full of hopes for the future. Our life was on display for everyone, and I took pride in having built such a successful career, just as she did. But mirrors don't lie. They show what is truly there, even when we try to hide it from ourselves. I long ignored the cracks that started appearing in our perfect image. At first, they were tiny fissures, easily ignored. Missed calls, minor delays, fleeting arguments. Over time, these cracks became more noticeable, and soon they shattered the entire mirror into pieces. It seemed to me that I was devoted to my life and my work, and that was my primary goal. I kept telling myself that everything I did was for us. I justified my constant absences with lofty goals and important tasks that needed my attention. But each trip, each absence added a new crack to our mirror. I always knew that Doris's political career took a lot of our time. She was absorbed by her work, and both of us suffered from a lack of understanding and genuine communication. We tried to stay connected, but it became increasingly difficult with each passing day. Our home felt empty, and that emptiness hurt me more than anything could. I tried not to show it, masking my anguish with outward calm and professional jargon. But I felt that it was becoming unbearable for both of us. Every morning, when I woke up and looked in the mirror, I saw that same crack. I knew it wasn't just a minor deviation from the norm. It was a sign that something in our marriage had broken. But I didn't want to acknowledge it. I was afraid that if I looked deeper, I would see something I couldn't change. When I heard that Doris had started seeing John, it was the final straw. I knew that everything we had was at risk. But I also knew that this was not just about infidelity. It was the result of all the cracks we had ignored, all the problems we hadn't addressed, and all the emotions we hadn't voiced. Cracks in a mirror don't just appear out of nowhere. They form when the glass is under stress, when it's struck, or when it's been subjected to constant pressure. Our marriage was that glass, and we both contributed to its stress. And now, the mirror had cracked, its shards scattered, revealing the full horror of what had been hidden. My reaction was swift, but its consequences were devastating. I started an investigation, knowing that if I didn't find out the truth myself, I would live in ignorance and be unable to make a measured decision. I hired a private investigator, hoping to get the evidence that might explain the pain I was feeling. When I saw the photographs sent to me, I felt something inside me shatter. The cracks I had tried to hide had become even more apparent. This wasn't just an act of betrayal. It was the culmination of all the years we had allowed our issues to accumulate, ignoring them. I saw Doris and John together, and it was not just a betrayal. It was a blow to all the ideals we once shared. At the moment I took the envelope with the photos, I realized that my perception of life, which I had built, had been destroyed. The cracks in the mirror had become a vast chasm that separated us. I was ready for a conversation that would determine what to do next. And while I knew that this conversation would be difficult, I also knew it was necessary. The time for forgiveness might have passed, and now I had to decide how to move forward. Cracks in the mirror are not just damage. They are symbols of shattered hopes and expectations. I knew that our mirror could no longer reflect the life we once had. Now it showed only the truth that was too painful to ignore. And now I stood before a decision that could change everything. Our marriage was like a mirror, and I didn't know if I could ever piece it together again. But one thing I knew for sure, the cracks would never align, and the mirror could never be restored. The weight of the truth is always heavier than you expect. When I first suspected that something was wrong with Doris and me, I clung to the hope that it was all in my mind. I convinced myself that my worries were just a side effect of my stress and the demands of my job. But deep down, I knew something was fundamentally broken. The cracks in our mirror were no longer subtle. They had become gaping fissures. It started with a nagging feeling, the kind that makes you question every interaction, every missed call, every late night. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a product of our busy lives. But the sense of disconnection grew stronger. Conversations with Doris became routine, lacking the warmth and intimacy we once shared. We were like two strangers living under the same roof, exchanging pleasantries but never really engaging. One evening, after yet another argument over something trivial, I found myself alone in the house, staring at the old family photos that lined the walls. They were a testament to happier times, a reminder of the bond we used to have. I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something had shifted, that those times were slipping further away. It was then that I decided to dig deeper. I started by examining Doris's behavior more closely. Little things at first: changes in her schedule, secretive phone calls, unexplained absences. Each discovery added to the growing pile of evidence that something was wrong. I knew I had to confront her, but I also knew that I needed more than just suspicion. I needed proof. The decision to hire a private investigator was not made lightly. I wrestled with the idea, torn between the desire to confront Doris with my fears and the need for concrete evidence. I chose the latter, hoping that seeing the truth with my own eyes would give me the clarity I needed to make the right decision. The investigator's report came through with the kind of precision I had hoped for but dreaded to see. It was a detailed account of Doris's activities, including the times and places she had been. The final blow came in the form of photographs that left no room for doubt. Doris and John, caught in moments of intimacy that were meant to be private. The images were a stark reminder of how far we had drifted from the life we once knew. Seeing those photos was like being punched in the gut. The pain was immediate and visceral. It was as if every hope, every dream we had built together had been reduced to nothing more than a cruel joke. The images were not just a betrayal. They were a testament to the distance that had grown between us, a chasm that had swallowed up our shared history. I struggled with the emotions that followed. Anger, sadness, and confusion all swirled together, creating a storm of feelings that I couldn't control. I found myself pacing the floor, unable to focus on anything other than the fact that our marriage was unraveling before my eyes. I had always thought of Doris as my rock, the person who would stand by me through thick and thin. But now, I felt abandoned, betrayed by the one person I trusted most. The decision to confront Doris was inevitable. I knew I couldn't continue living in this state of uncertainty and pain. I had to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. But I also knew that the conversation wouldn't be easy. Doris and I had always been able to talk through our problems, but this was different. This was not just about a misunderstanding or a temporary issue. It was about a fundamental breach of trust, and I had no idea how to address it. I arranged for a meeting with Doris, choosing a quiet place where we could talk without interruptions. As I prepared for the conversation, I rehearsed what I would say, trying to find the right words to express the hurt and disappointment I felt. But I knew that words alone couldn't convey the depth of my feelings. The images spoke for themselves, and they would be the catalyst for whatever came next. When Doris walked into the room, she looked different, nervous, perhaps even afraid. I could see the strain in her eyes, and I wondered if she had already realized the magnitude of what had happened. We exchanged pleasantries, but the air between us was heavy with unspoken tension. I took a deep breath and began to speak, each word feeling like it was being torn from me. "Doris," I started, my voice shaking slightly, "I know about you and John. I have the photos. I know what's been happening." Her reaction was immediate, a mixture of shock and guilt. I could see her struggling to find the right words, but the truth was already out there. The evidence was undeniable, and there was no escaping it. What followed was a painful conversation, one that forced both of us to confront the reality of our situation. We talked about how we had arrived at this point, the decisions that had led us here, and the future of our relationship. In that moment, I realized how far we had come from the couple we once were. The cracks in our mirror had become irreparable, and the reflection it showed was not the life we had envisioned. The path to the truth had been difficult, but it was necessary. And as we faced each other, the weight of that truth began to sink in, marking the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter in our lives. The moment of confrontation had passed, but the aftermath left me in a state of emotional chaos. Doris and I were like two ships adrift in a stormy sea, with no clear direction and no certainty about what lay ahead. The initial shock of discovering the affair had given way to a deeper, more unsettling realization. There was no turning back from this point. The days following our confrontation were filled with a heavy silence. Our home, once a place of shared laughter and conversation, had become a cold, distant environment. We moved through the space like ghosts, each absorbed in our own thoughts and the enormity of what had transpired. The air was thick with unspoken words, and every glance seemed to carry a weight of unresolved tension. Despite our best efforts to maintain some semblance of normalcy, the cracks in our relationship had become chasms that could not be ignored. Doris and I had agreed to seek counseling, a last-ditch effort to salvage whatever remained of our marriage. But as I sat in the waiting room of the therapist's office, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more of a formality than a genuine attempt to repair the damage. The sessions were awkward, filled with forced conversations and rehearsed apologies. Doris spoke of her regret and the mistakes she had made, but her words felt hollow, like they were being recited from a script rather than coming from the heart. I tried to be open and understanding, but each session only served to highlight the deep-seated issues that had led us to this point. The therapist's attempts to guide us through our emotions felt like they were met with resistance, as if we were both trapped in a web of our own making. I spent my days trying to focus on work, immersing myself in the tasks that had once been my escape from personal troubles. But even there, I could not escape the shadow of our failing marriage. The constant reminders of Doris's betrayal loomed over me, clouding my judgment and sapping my energy. I found it difficult to concentrate on anything but the disarray of my personal life. One evening, as I sat in my home office, I received a call from John Schmidt, Doris's former campaign manager. His voice was smooth and calculated, but beneath the surface, I could sense an undertone of desperation. He wanted to meet and discuss the fallout from the affair. I agreed, driven by a need to understand the full extent of the situation and to see if there was anything more I could learn about Doris's actions. Our meeting took place in a discreet cafe, away from prying eyes. John's demeanor was calm, but there was an underlying tension in his posture. He spoke candidly about the affair, admitting that it had started as a professional relationship but had evolved into something more. His words were clinical, almost detached, as he described the circumstances that had led to their involvement. It was evident that he was trying to distance himself from the emotional aspects of the situation, focusing instead on the practical implications. I listened, absorbing the details with a mixture of anger and resignation. John's account only reinforced the sense of betrayal I felt. It was clear that Doris's actions had not only damaged our marriage, but had also caused significant disruption to her political career. The public scandal, combined with the personal fallout, had created a mess that would be difficult to untangle. As the meeting concluded, John extended an olive branch, suggesting that we work together to manage the public relations aspect of the scandal. His proposal was driven by a desire to salvage his own reputation as well as to help Doris navigate the crisis. But I was in no mood for cooperation. My primary concern was dealing with the personal repercussions of Doris's actions, not managing the fallout for someone who had betrayed my trust. Returning home, I faced Doris with a renewed sense of determination. The therapy sessions had not provided the answers I had hoped for, and John's revelations had only deepened my disillusionment. The reality of our situation had become undeniable. Our marriage was irreparably damaged, and no amount of therapy or public relations maneuvering could change that. I confronted Doris with the hard truth. We were at a crossroads, and there was no turning back. The trust that had once been the foundation of our relationship had been shattered beyond repair. The emotional distance between us was now a chasm that no amount of counseling or reconciliation could bridge. Doris listened, her face a mask of sadness and resignation. She acknowledged the gravity of the situation, but her words were tinged with a sense of helplessness. She had tried to make amends, but the damage was done, and there was no way to undo the past. In that moment, I realized that continuing the marriage was not a feasible option. The pain and betrayal were too great, and the trust that had once been the cornerstone of our relationship had been irrevocably broken. We were both trapped in a situation that had no easy resolution, and the only path forward was to acknowledge the reality of our situation. The finality of that realization was sobering. It marked the end of an era, the closing of a chapter that had defined much of our lives. As we faced the inevitable, I felt a mixture of sorrow and relief. The road ahead would be challenging, but at least it was a path that offered clarity and a chance for a new beginning. The path to truth had been difficult and painful, but it had led us to a point where we could no longer ignore the reality of our situation. As Doris and I prepared to move forward, I knew that there was no turning back. The decisions we made in the coming days would shape the rest of our lives, and we had to confront the future with honesty and resolve. The day of the confrontation had arrived, and the weight of it pressed heavily on my shoulders. It was as if the entire universe had conspired to ensure that every moment of this ordeal would be etched into my memory. The reality of the situation was unavoidable. The pain, betrayal, and shattered trust were now my constant companions. Doris and I had agreed to meet in a neutral location, away from the confines of our home. The idea was to have a private and uninterrupted conversation, where we could address the issues between us with some semblance of civility. But I knew that despite the setting, the conversation was bound to be fraught with tension. I arrived at the restaurant early, seeking a moment of calm before the storm. The place was upscale, with a refined ambience that felt oddly out of place given the nature of our meeting. I chose a secluded corner table, hoping it would provide us with some privacy. As I waited, I could feel the anxiety building within me, each minute dragging on like an eternity. Doris arrived precisely on time, her presence both familiar and foreign. She looked composed, but I could see the strain in her eyes, the remnants of the guilt and regret she had been carrying. I stood to greet her, and we exchanged a brief, awkward hug, an attempt at normalcy that fell flat. The ritualistic gestures felt hollow, a stark contrast to the deep emotional chasm between us. We sat down, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The menu lay between us like a barrier, a symbol of the ordinary world we were both trying to cling to amidst the chaos. I could see Doris's fingers fidgeting, a subtle sign of her discomfort. I knew that whatever words were about to be spoken would carry a weight far beyond mere conversation. "I think we both know why we're here," I began, my voice steady but laced with a hint of bitterness. "We need to address the situation between us, what's happened and what it means for our future." Doris nodded, her eyes meeting mine with a mix of apprehension and resignation. "Yes, I agree. We need to talk about this. It's not just about us anymore. It's about the consequences and how we move forward." The conversation began with the expected apologies and explanations. Doris reiterated her regret, describing her actions as a series of mistakes that had spiraled out of control. She spoke of her feelings for John, the campaign manager who had been more than just a professional acquaintance. Her words were rehearsed, almost mechanical, and while she expressed remorse, it felt like she was reciting lines from a script rather than speaking from the heart. I listened, but I couldn't shake the feeling of disconnection. The woman before me was someone I once knew intimately, but now she seemed like a stranger who was desperately trying to justify her actions. Her explanations did little to ease the pain or answer the questions that had been tormenting me. "Doris," I said, cutting through the pretense, "I need to understand something. Was our marriage ever real to you? Or was it just a convenient arrangement for you, a backdrop to your ambitions and desires?" Her eyes widened at my question, and she took a deep breath before responding. "It was real to me. It still is. I made a terrible mistake, and I'm deeply sorry for it. But my feelings for you haven't changed. I know that might be hard to believe right now, but it's true." I could see the sincerity in her eyes, but the words rang hollow. The betrayal had eroded the foundation of our relationship, leaving me to question the authenticity of everything we had shared. The hurt was palpable, and it was clear that no amount of remorse could undo the damage that had been done. "I need to know what you want from me," I said, my voice tinged with frustration. "What are you asking me to do? Do you want us to try and rebuild our marriage, or are you simply trying to salvage what's left of your public image?" Doris's face flushed with a mix of anger and hurt. "This isn't just about my public image. I genuinely want to work through this, to fix what's broken. But I understand if you can't or don't want to. I know I've caused irreparable damage." The conversation continued, delving into the specifics of what each of us wanted moving forward. Doris suggested counseling and a renewed commitment to our marriage, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She had been grappling with the fallout from the affair, trying to balance her personal regrets with her professional responsibilities. As the discussion progressed, I realized that there were no easy answers. The decisions we had to make were complex and deeply personal. The trust that had once bound us together had been shattered, and rebuilding it would require more than just words or promises. It would take time, effort, and an emotional commitment that neither of us was sure we could provide. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that we were at an impasse. The confrontation had laid bare the realities of our situation, but it had also highlighted the profound difficulties we faced. Doris and I were both grappling with our own emotions and the weight of the decisions that lay ahead. As we parted ways, there was a palpable sense of finality. The confrontation had been necessary, but it had also underscored the distance that had grown between us. We were no longer the couple who could easily navigate challenges together. Instead, we were two individuals struggling to find a way forward amidst the wreckage of our shared past. The confrontation marked a turning point in our relationship. It was a moment of truth that revealed the deep fractures in our marriage, and it set the stage for the difficult decisions we would have to make in the days and weeks to come. There was no turning back from this point, and as Doris and I faced the future, we knew that our lives would be forever changed by the choices we made. The aftermath of the confrontation was a period of disintegration. The fragile structures that had once supported my life now lay in ruins, scattered across the landscape of my existence. I was left amidst the debris of a marriage I had invested so much in, the emotional wreckage more profound than any physical damage could ever be. The days following our meeting were a blur of activity and introspection. Doris had returned to her public life, trying to salvage her career and reputation in the wake of the scandal. I, on the other hand, was grappling with the reality of my new status: estranged husband, disillusioned partner, and betrayed confidant. My role in our relationship had changed from supportive spouse to a passive observer of its disintegration. Each day, I was bombarded by the constant reminders of the betrayal. The media, relentless as always, had seized upon the story with voracious enthusiasm. Headlines screamed about the political scandal, the marital meltdown, and the fall from grace. The sensationalism was overwhelming, turning our private pain into public spectacle. I found myself being inundated with calls from reporters and journalists, their questions probing into the most intimate corners of my life. In the midst of this chaos, I tried to find some semblance of normalcy. I threw myself into work, hoping that focusing on my business would provide an escape from the emotional turmoil. But every meeting, every business decision, was tainted by the knowledge of my personal crisis. It was as if the entire world was in on a cruel joke, and I was the punchline. The more I tried to immerse myself in work, the more I found that the weight of my personal circumstances was impossible to escape. My conversations with Doris had become infrequent and strained. We communicated primarily through lawyers and intermediaries, our interactions now a series of formalities and legalities rather than heartfelt discussions. The trust that had once allowed us to share our deepest thoughts and feelings had been eroded, leaving us with nothing but cold, transactional exchanges. It was a painful reminder of how far we had fallen from the intimacy we once enjoyed. In the solitude of my home, I found myself reflecting on the choices that had led us here. The recriminations were relentless, both from within and from the outside world. I questioned every decision, every word spoken, every action taken. The questions haunted me. What could I have done differently? Where did we go wrong? Was there anything that could have prevented this? The destruction of my marriage was not just an emotional blow. It was a profound personal failure. I had prided myself on my ability to navigate the complexities of life, to manage risks and challenges with skill and precision. Yet, in the most important aspect of my life, I had been caught utterly off guard. The reality of my vulnerability was a bitter pill to swallow. Amidst the wreckage, I began to confront the raw, unfiltered truth of the situation. The disintegration of our relationship was not merely a result of Doris's actions. It was a culmination of underlying issues that had been brewing for years. The demands of our careers, the constant travel, the emotional distance, all of these factors had contributed to the erosion of our marriage. Doris's affair was the visible manifestation of deeper, unresolved problems that had festered beneath the surface. The destruction of our relationship had ripple effects that extended beyond our personal lives. It impacted our families, our friends, and our professional lives. The sense of betrayal and failure was palpable, affecting not just how others saw us, but how we saw ourselves. I felt as though I was living in a world that had been irrevocably altered, where the familiar had become foreign and the future uncertain. Despite the overwhelming sense of loss, there was a part of me that sought redemption and understanding. I began to seek therapy, hoping that professional help could provide some clarity and guidance. The process was both revealing and painful. It forced me to confront my own role in the marriage's breakdown and to grapple with the emotions I had been suppressing. Through therapy, I began to understand that while the destruction of my marriage was a profound personal loss, it was also an opportunity for growth and self-discovery. It was a chance to rebuild from the ruins, to reevaluate my priorities, and to find a new path forward. The journey was far from easy, but it was a necessary step in the process of healing and moving on. As I navigated this new chapter of my life, I found solace in the small victories and moments of clarity. The destruction of my marriage, while devastating, had also opened the door to new possibilities. It was a harsh reminder of the fragility of human relationships and the importance of facing reality, no matter how painful it might be. In the end, the destruction was not just about what was lost, but also about what could be rebuilt. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the capacity for growth even in the face of overwhelming adversity. And while the path ahead was uncertain, it was one that I was determined to navigate with a newfound sense of purpose and strength. The truth, once revealed, came with a steep price, one that I had never anticipated when I first began untangling the web of deceit. It was a sobering realization that the cost of honesty was not merely measured in the currency of reputation or status, but in the more intangible realm of personal and emotional sacrifice. In the weeks following the public revelation of Doris's affair, the media frenzy had died down, but the residual effects were still keenly felt. The scandal had left an indelible mark on both our lives, and the fallout was far from over. The initial shock had given way to a slow, agonizing process of coming to terms with the reality of our situation. I was now living in the aftermath of the truth, a truth that had shattered my life and revealed the raw, painful core of our relationship's failure. I had expected the media storm, the judgment, and the speculation. What I hadn't fully grasped was the depth of personal cost, the emotional toll that would come from living with the consequences of that truth. Every day, I was confronted with the stark reality of my new life. The walls of my home, once a sanctuary, now seemed to close in on me, filled with echoes of what used to be. The photographs, the letters, the shared memories, all were now reminders of a past that felt both distant and painfully present. The process of confronting the truth had led me to a deeper understanding of the nature of honesty and its impact. It became clear that while the truth had freed me from the shackles of deception, it had also placed me in a position of vulnerability. The honesty I had demanded from Doris had come at a great personal cost, and now I was left to navigate the world with the raw, unvarnished reality of our situation. The price of truth was evident in the strained relationships with friends and family. People who had once been close allies were now distant, their opinions colored by the scandal. Some judged me harshly, believing that I should have done more to prevent the collapse of our marriage, while others seemed to blame me for exposing the truth. The sense of isolation was palpable, as if the very act of seeking the truth had alienated me from those who had once been my support system. Work, too, was no refuge. The business world, much like the personal sphere, was unforgiving. My professional relationships were tainted by the scandal, and I found myself grappling with the fallout of a personal crisis that had spilled into my professional life. The scrutiny and judgment that came with the public revelation had made it difficult to maintain the same level of focus and dedication. The boundaries between my personal and professional life had blurred, and I was left to deal with the repercussions on both fronts. In the midst of this chaos, I found myself struggling with a profound sense of loss. The idealized vision of my life that I had once held had been replaced by a harsh, disillusioning reality. The truth, while liberating in some ways, had also forced me to confront the stark, unflinching reality of our circumstances. The idealized notions of love, partnership, and success had crumbled, leaving me with a more nuanced and often painful understanding of these concepts. Despite the difficulties, there was a part of me that recognized the value of the truth. The process of facing reality had led to a deeper self-awareness and personal growth. I had been forced to confront my own role in the dissolution of the marriage and to come to terms with the ways in which I had contributed to the situation. It was a difficult and often uncomfortable journey, but one that was necessary for personal development. The price of truth was not just about the external consequences, but also about the internal struggle. It required a willingness to face uncomfortable emotions, to accept responsibility, and to navigate the complex landscape of personal and professional fallout. It was a reminder that truth, while powerful, often came with a cost that was both profound and multifaceted. As I moved forward, I began to see the value in embracing the truth fully. It was a painful but essential step in the process of healing and rebuilding. The journey was far from over, and the road ahead remained uncertain. But with each passing day, I found solace in the knowledge that I was living with authenticity and integrity, even if it came at a high price. The truth had changed me, and while the cost was significant, it was also a catalyst for growth and transformation. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the capacity to find strength in the face of adversity. And as I continued to navigate the complexities of my new reality, I did so with a renewed sense of purpose and determination to build a future that was grounded in truth and self-awareness.